brother say a little bit more about the speaker, a little bit about our philosophy. This is the brain and now what we're calling the body restoration clinic. What we really want is to have all of us be restored and our loved ones be restored to health and wellness. And we believe that it is possible in time with the right knowledge and application of that knowledge. So we're going to talk more about that. It was Hippocrates who said, let food be your medicine and medicine your food. You have writers like Gene Harper who even talked a little bit about food with medicinal and miraculous properties. It's up to us to discover what these are. I'd like to just say a few words on a couple of people who are here. All of you are special to us, and as I said, several others will be coming in, but I have our dear cousin Gigi, who's come from Chicago, who's with us. There, raise your hands. And my brother, our younger brother, Daniel, there, he's into computer softwares and that sort of thing there. So we're happy to have them there. A few housekeeping things. There is a restroom right around the corner here and also in the lobby. We will take a 5-minute break there so that you can stretch, etc. There are beverages, water back there. And finally, you are not seeing double. And this is not a talk on psychedelic shrooms and things like that, is it? So we're not going to talk about the psychoactive aspects. So there are two of us. You're not seeing double. And so I'm going to turn it over to my brother who has a few things to say. So again, I'd like to welcome all of you, as my brother did, you who are here, who took the time to come to this very important, we think, transformative talk. We would also like to welcome our Facebook Live audience, as we are on Facebook Live, that individuals can join in from their homes and also maybe access this later on if they were not able to do so at this time. So welcome, everyone. I'm a neurologist, so I'm concerned about the brain, but also the body, because we know that the brain and the body work together. The gastrointestinal system, the immune system. And as I ponder about the brain, I view the brain as potentially being traumatized or insulted by many different mechanisms. So the brain can be traumatized by toxins, external toxins, as well as internal toxins. We have problems where the immune system itself attacks the brain, what we call neuroautoimmune problems. And all of these, whether we're dealing with inborn errors of metabolism, toxicological, trauma, concussions, one of the final common pathway is inflammation. If we have inflammation of the brain and other organs, that can lead to dysfunction. So what can we do? Is there a way to access natural nutrients and ingredients in plants, other agents that are safe, effective, that can combat inflammation, provide antioxidant protection? In neurology, we use the term neuroprotection. Can we do all of that? Well, today we're gonna look at medicinal mushrooms. It was Paul Stamets, who's a mycologist. A mycologist is someone who studies fungi, of which mushrooms are a part. He wrote that mushrooms are like miniature pharmaceutical factories, and they produce all types of ingredients that can bring healing at multiple levels. But how can we learn about these healing properties? How can we access that, whether we're suffering with pain, cognitive issues, seizures, PANDAS, PANS, neurobehavioral, neurodevelopmental, all of these? Can we even have a product that has nerve growth factors to allow new brain cells or new brain components to grow? Where you're going to learn a lot about medicinal mushrooms by my own friend, Fred Callahan. And let me just spend a moment to introduce you to Fred Callahan. He has an engineering mind. I have to admit, I am fascinated by the engineering mind, because engineers, and we have some in our audience, beside Fred too, who are here, are problem solvers. They like to think rationally and come up with solutions. Fred is also, and he may talk about it some more, the father of a special needs child. And when you're in that position, you get it, you understand, you're able to look at things from a personal one-on-one level. And so finding solutions does not just become an academic exercise, it's something that causes passion when it's driven to find answers. And so that's how we are led to this talk on medicinal mushrooms by our own Fred Callahan. He's well-traveled, he's a lecturer, like I said, he's a problem solver, and he's part of our inner think tank of trying to come up with solutions, real healing solutions. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my friend Fred Callahan, and he'll take it from here. And again, thank you all for coming.
Okay, thank you for that lovely introduction. Oh yeah, that's right, that's screensaver. I got it. So the talk is on medicinal mushrooms. If you were expecting somebody with a tie-dye t-shirt, long hair, and peace beads, wrong mushrooms. So, as Dr. Corbier pointed out, I'm also going to bring up Paul Stamets. Questions I want to answer in this presentation. Basically, why mushrooms? And how did we get here? And more importantly, you'll come to find out how did I get here. About 1.5 years ago, what I knew about mushrooms was they tasted good on a pepperoni pizza. So for me to stand up here and talk about mushrooms, if you told me 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't have believed you. And if 1.5 years ago you'd have said, Fred, I think your answer is going to be in mushrooms, I probably would have said something very thoughtful like, oh, you're one of those people, and then turned and walked away from me. I want to go over, there's 4 main different kind of mushrooms I'm going to cover today. We're going to spend a lot of time on chaga because it was the first one I started with. So it was the one that I did the most research on. But ask yourself, how can something that's natural, been around for thousands of years, widely available, you could pull it off any tree, how could that help us with today's modern health problems? I hope to answer that for you satisfactorily. Long-term side effects, there's very good news on that. And then, do we have enough information to proceed? Will be the last thing that we'll discuss. So why mushrooms? If you were here in October of 2016, I did a presentation basically about Dr. Duffy and Dr. Rotenberg's steroid protocol. And my son has autism, and Dr. Rotenberg's actually a friend of mine, and I happened to be in town, we were eating lunch. And he brought down a copy of this paper that showed how they recovered children, recently regressed autistic children, so between the ages of 2 and 3, who had regressive autism, so they were normal, then they had autism, and they regressed. And they were able to recover these children through steroids, high dose, long term. So I said, well, geez, you think this is something we could try? And yeah, he said you could try it under doctor supervision, which we did. And so for the first 2.5 months, it did nothing. And I was starting to lose hope and thinking, well, maybe this isn't going to work. But then all of a sudden, my son started coming out with these autistic symptoms. Pulled his fingers out of his ears, started having well-pronounced speech, started doing pronoun switch. We would say, it's your turn, and rather than repeat back, your turn, he would say, my turn. So we were actually watching the autism kind of fall away. But within 1.5 months, as it began, his lipid panels were off, his weight was way up. So there were significant health concerns, and through the advice of doctor, we had to quickly remove him. So what was going to be a 14-month protocol, we could only accomplish 4. But for that 1.5 months, we got a glimpse of what my child's like without autism. So Dr. Duffy and Dr. Rotenberg's theory of autism being an auditory inflammatory response seems to hold merit. At least that's part of the problem, maybe not the whole solution. But when you remove the inflammation from the auditory cortex and the brain fires normally, you get a pretty typical developing child. Well, the solution was simple. All I needed was to reduce the inflammation in his auditory cortex, was to find a safe steroid, one that you can take in high dose and long term. So I wrote a list down of all the safe steroids. These are in alphabetical order. And I know you're taking notes already.
Yeah.
Okay. So seeing that list was kind of minimal, I asked myself, well, what is a steroid? What makes a steroid a steroid? Are there alternatives? These NSAIDs, non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs. Would any of those have the same effect, or would they too have side effects, which of course they do. So then I said, okay, well, what about natural? Is there, I don't know, milk or ice cream or things that would be good to eat that also would have these anti-inflammatory properties or these steroid-like properties? And what if we combine them? So if we had milk on our cereal and both of them were anti-inflammatory or steroid-like, well, that's good. Maybe we can accomplish this by combining a bunch of natural steroids that are safe in high dose. You can eat all the cereal you want, and they're safe for long term. But I was more interested, molecularly speaking, and I started looking at the molecular structure of steroids. So here you have cortisol, and if you'll notice, it's a six-side, 5-side molecule with a tail at position C17. And prednisone is the same thing, 6-5, and a tail at C17. Dexamethasone, now the top two actually reproduce in our body naturally, but if you were to get poison ivy or something, the doctor can prescribe a higher dose of those to boost your anti-inflammatory properties while you get over the poison ivy. I'm not sure if dexamethasone is natural or is this purely synthetic. Is it? And about the only difference is it has a fluoride where a hydrogen is, but they all have the basic same shape. So I said, okay, well, is there anything in nature that has this shape? Okay, there's this molecule called lanistane. Okay, well, we're on to something. So what has the highest amount of lanistane? Right, that would be the question. And it turns out it's chaga mushroom. Ionotus obliquus is the Latin term for it. Here's an International Journal for Medical Mushrooms from 2018. Basically, the first thing it's titled with was lanistane. So, okay. Oh, by the way, I did want to mention, if you notice in the upper right, there's a number. I don't know if you all can see it. But each one of these slides has the number, so you don't have to sit there and try to remember what question you want to ask. Just remember the number. And at the break at the midpoint, we can go back to that slide. So anyway, chaga had the highest amount of lanistane. It's also known as the gift from God and the king of the mushrooms for its healing properties. I thought, well, that's a good sign, right? We're on pretty good ground there. Not too many things are called the gift from God or the king of anything. So if you look at lanistane, it is a triterpenoid. Basically, it has relevant pharmacological properties. It acts very much like pharmacy drugs. Chaga mushroom itself is found on birch trees, mainly for the most part. It grows only in the northern climates, so we're not going to be able to get it in this area. You have to be north of North Carolina effectively. Now there is a mountain in North Carolina near Tennessee that apparently you can find it. But everything north of that. It basically was acknowledged by a Chinese monk in 100 BC as a medicine. So they didn't have CVS and Walgreens in those days. Basically, that was their medicine. So I won't go into all this, but for the past 40 years, there's been over 1,600 scientific studies, and again, for pharmacological effects. Here's the most important thing. Chaga's DNA is 30% identical to ours. So what makes us up, almost a third, is in chaga. More so than any other plant or animal. Chaga is more like us than it is anything else. Now, that should seem significant. Chaga faces the same pathogens we do. It's got our DNA. So it's fighting the same things that we fight. Now, it doesn't have arms to fight or legs to run away, so it develops its own immunity. Therefore, when we pull the substances out of chaga and those immune factors, they'll work for us. We've got the same DNA. We have a common cousin, if you will. Chaga was found on Ötzi the Iceman, if you remember that story from, I think it was the mid-90s. He was carrying chaga. And so that was 5,300 years ago. So it's been around a while. People have known about it longer than what I'm telling you here today. Usually it's been used for obviously thousands of years as a holistic In the early days, it was actually considered a medicine. There was a Chinese monastery or Buddhist temple or whatever the Chinese people do. And they only had 2 medicines, chaga and reishi. And they considered that to be all that they needed. Again, more numbers here. I'm not going to go into all the details. Here's what I want to get across to you here. 3/4 of the papers that have been written on chaga, scientifically and medically, have been written in the past 20 years. So although it's been around for thousands of years and people have known about it for thousands of years, 3/4 of the knowledge we have has only been written in the past 20. We are an intelligent species, aren't we? It would be nice to learn from our ancestors, but in this case, apparently we didn't. Definition of medical Latin terms. Now, I know 2 words in Latin, semper and fidelis. If you know what that means, fine. If not, don't worry about it. I'm going to go through these. Now, the top one, the first one, my mentor, Dr. George Callahan, pronounced it in situ, as in situation. My mom, who's in the medical field, pronounces it in situ. What do you do? In situ. In situ. I don't care. No, I mean, it's one of those that they both think they're right. I'm going to refer to both of them just so I don't offend anybody. But basically, what in situ means is in its natural environment with minimal outside influences. You're going to see the term, if you read a lot of these papers, in vivo. In vivo means in the organism. So these are your the famous guinea pig studies, if you will, all the way up to human clinical trials. Those studies would be in vivo, and in vitro is Latin for in the glass. So these would be your petri dish types with cells or tissues or something. So when you're reading through these, you want to kind of look at what kind of study was it. Doesn't mean you wouldn't continue reading it, but it's one of those things that you would just kind of remember the source as you're going through it. Now, here's some of those PubMed papers. And you're going to see chaga does some pretty amazing things. The top one is reversal of inhibition of gap-junk intercellular communication, which is pretty impressive for a mushroom. Anti-mutagenic effects. It has immune modulatory of just the regular water extract, which we're going to cover later on. Certainly a lot of antioxidant metabolites, antioxidant effects. Brand new antioxidant polyphenols that were discovered in 2012. Reduces oxidative stress and inhibits oxidative damage. Well, for a mushroom, this is pretty good. And so my point is, what I know about mushrooms, again, has been just over a year. There are plenty of papers, and plenty of places where you can gather your own information. You don't have to take my word for it. There are tons of papers available for you to read yourself, and particularly about any conditions that you're interested in. And there's a lot of papers. So this is probably 30 of 256. There are some human trials, by the way. I think there was 47 of them. So this isn't all necessarily labs. And one thing I did want to talk about, to give you an example of in situ, in vivo, and in vitro, an example would be if you wanted to test a new herbicide. So let's say you plant a tomato plant and you plant some weeds around it, you let everything kind of get grown, and then you spray it and see what happens. Are the weeds killed and the tomato plant, is it? Well, somebody comes along and says, what about the earthworms? Yeah, that's true. Well, you couldn't do an in-situation study because if you sprayed it and the earthworms didn't like it, they would crawl away. So you would create an in vivo study. Basically, you have a lab, set up a container, plant a plant. Now you're kind of interfering with the natural environment. It's no longer getting the natural sun, the wind, the rain, and everything, but you've shifted your focus from the plant to the worm. And you can put the worms in there and study them one at a time. And then if somebody said, well, how's it going to be with people? You wouldn't say, here, drink this and let's find out. You would do an in vitro study where you would take human cells or human tissues, put them in a petri dish, and then put the herbicide next to it. So as again, when you're looking at these papers, keep in mind of those terms. what happens sometimes in a petri dish doesn't necessarily pertain what happens in real life. There's also a lot of YouTube videos on chaga. And Paul Stamets, we're going to talk about a couple times here. He has probably 30 to 35 years experience dealing medicinal mushrooms. And he has several books, presentations online. He has his own company that sells extracts and mushrooms. So he's definitely a good resource. Paul Stamets, you can get at YouTube or on his website. Dr. Carl Mare has a fairly good presentation on YouTube. He's more of a CAM doctor, or what they call complementary alternative medicine, what we call integrative medicine. This is where East meets West. So while West is pharmaceutical and provide you a drug, East is going to provide other things to help complement your immune system and help get things. So the two come together in integrative medicine. There's also David Wolf. He has several presentations on YouTube, but he also has, it's kind of interesting, he'll sit down one-on-one as if being interviewed like by a reporter, and then they record it. So a lot of times they'll have just a deep discussion, and the reporter has an opportunity to ask him questions. It's kind of interesting format. He was the one that wrote the book, Chaga, King of the Medicinal Mushrooms, so I didn't invent that term. I doubt he did too. Dr. Christopher Hobbs has a book out called Medicinal Mushrooms, and he too has a lot of presentations. Now, the next one down is a gentleman, Paul, I don't know his last name, it isn't Corbier. But his website is Nyishar, Nyishar, which is, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, an Indian term, I believe. And he actually takes you through all the health benefits of chaga, all the way through to decoctions, as he calls them, or how to make it. So that you could actually purchase chaga online, even on eBay, and follow his directions in order to produce your own extracts. The last one at the bottom is Adam Harrington. He's a kid from Pittsburgh, very, very normal speech, very broken down, very understandable. He also has some kind of an online store, but he wrote the paper, which he'll send you for free, The Guide to Medicinal Mushrooms. And it's a fairly good paper, especially when it comes to identifying and what each do. There's also books. So if you're looking for your own information, there's many, many, many books, some of them from 1950. Paul Stamets' books are there. There's David Wolf's, Christopher Hobbs. There's many books. So again, don't take what I'm telling you as gospel. I've only been doing it a year and a half. There's plenty of resources that you can go find out your own information, particularly for any condition that you're interested in. So the easiest way to take chaga is chaga tea. I have a bag here that is full of chaga. I want to leave here with an empty bag. If you guys want to, after the fact, come up, feel free to take as many as you want to take home and try it. And what you'll do is just break this up into pieces. I don't know if you can see it back there, but they're about an inch or so. Break this up into a handful of pieces. Then, and believe me, these pieces go a long way. So this isn't one time like a tea bag and you throw them away. You make a couple cups of coffee, tea, 4 or so cups of tea, then throw it in a bowl in your freezer, and then the next time you want to have chaga tea, just drop it back in. You usually want to start with a pan. So you boil water and then reduce it to a simmer. Now, I say 1 to 2 hours. You'll see Paul from Nyishar says 3 to 4 hours, just until you get a nice colored tea. Now, as you go along, it could make potentially these little chunks, 1 or 2 of them can make up to 30 cups. So this little piece is going to last you a long time. But feel free to take more than just one. Some people, it has kind of it's really kind of a strange way of describing it, kind of a mushroom vanilla flavor. Some people like it just as it is. There's a lot of people who are healthy, they'll put in maple syrup or honey. I could just tell you to use sugar. But anyway, this is the easiest way to try chaga and see if it will have some benefits. The next way is an extract, where you would do the same thing. You would take this and either break it up into chunks or grind it into a fine powder. throw it into a crock pot. Some people leave the top off. You don't want to get the temperature much above 150, somewhere between 120 and 150, because it's such a long period of time. So you don't want to break down the polysaccharides and everything that you just pulled out of it through heat and temperature. So try to keep it on the low side. But like the tea, you want to strain out, and if you use the powder, you have to buy one of those stainless steel mesh screens from the dollar store for just this purpose. Now, what we do is called a triple water extract. It's a little bit more complicated. We use the pH, and we actually swing the pH by using acidic or alkali factors. So it's the same thing. It starts off the same way, 150 degrees for 24 hours, but we're actually doing this 3 different times. And we alter the pH very high on the scale. Now the purpose of that is to try to break down this outer sclerotial layer. And I know it's hard for you to tell. It looks like a piece of burnt charcoal, but this is like hard like concrete, this outer level. And so this outer skin has a lot of the constituents we're interested in. I was interested in trying to find a way of breaking it down. In the first regular water decoctions, a lot of times it would go in as a particle, it would come out as a particle. But with the triple water extraction, it actually comes out like mud or fine silt. So we are able to break down that outer hard layer. The last one I want to talk about is alcohol extract. It takes about 8 weeks. So this is the longest form of doing extraction. Again, you can do pieces or particles. We use 190 proof grain alcohol to do our extractions, but you can come all the way down to like a 100 proof or a 50% alcohol. So some of your vodkas and rums, for example. Now there are people who use flavored vodka because they intend to drink it when they're done, take shots of it. Well, this was for my 12-year-old son, and they frown on that in North Carolina. I don't know about South Carolina. So I had to find a way to get the alcohol out and away from what I just extracted, the mushroom extract. One final thing, by the way, shake this for the first few days and then every couple of weeks. And people say, why? If it's soaking in here, why shake it? We figure that every particle is going to have around it this alcohol that just extracted out everything until it was saturated. Now, keep in mind, this isn't moving. It's in a jar on a shelf. For the other alcohol that's around it, can't get to it because you've got this sphere that's around there that's saturated. But by shaking it, you move the saturated alcohol out of the way and allow the new alcohol to come in and start doing its extractions. So at least for the first few days, and then every couple weeks you walk by, oh yeah, that's right, let's go ahead and give it a quick shake. If you're gonna go less than 50%, a lot of your 80 proof vodkas or flavored or rums, take that 8 weeks and probably wanna go to like 10 weeks, even potentially 12. Just give it an opportunity for that alcohol to get in there. So, since I had to remove the alcohol, I decided, well, I know alcohol boils at a much lower temperature than water, well, much, 173 degrees Fahrenheit. So I bought a cylinder with a hydrometer, and basically we used a double boiler, and we would boil off the alcohol and then test it until I got a 0 reading, then that became the sample. The problem with alcohol, especially when you're using grain alcohol, is it explodes at 195 degrees. So we had to be very careful to get above 173, but not get to 195 and to save the house. My wife was thrilled with this, by the way. We didn't really do it for very long. Before I decided, okay, I'll just go ahead and get a rotary evaporator. And I got a video of this. Basically, a rotary evaporator system consists of a chiller, a vacuum pump, and some kind of a heating unit. But you can remove the alcohol even below room temperature. So a rotary evaporator works by pulling a very high vacuum, which makes the alcohol boil at 58 degrees Fahrenheit, basically turning it into a gas or a steam, which contacts the cooling coil, which is at minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and basically causes the alcohol to change phase and convert back to a liquid, which I can collect and use again. So eventually all the alcohol evaporates out with only the extract remaining. And the big thing is, when we were heating it to 180, 185, I just spent all this time, 2 months, pulling out all these polysaccharides and triterpenes and polyphenols I was probably destroying them by putting in this high temperature. So I was breaking them all, everything I just extracted that's good, I just broke back apart by putting it through a high energy source. So by using a rotary evaporator, we're able to do this even below the temperature it sat at for the whole 2 months. Water and alcohol do have different properties, but for us, and for what we're looking for and what we're using it for, they're really not that important. The terpenes that come out with the alcohol are mainly for cancer research, or that's where you see a lot of it is on the cancer side, more so than on the inflammatory or immune side. And studies have shown basically that the tea and the basic water extract that I just told you about produces a great deal of these nutraceuticals. Now, let me stop there. What's the difference? So a pharmaceutical is finding an active compound or ingredient that you're interested in, and you keep extracting and extracting and reducing and extracting until you get that one ingredient that you want. You produce a bunch of it, you press it into capsules or pills, and then we sell it to you as a drug. That's called pharmacy. A nutraceutical is basically leaving all the other things that are with it in place. So a nutraceutical does tend to be more, as Dr. Corbier's were saying, more for the whole body versus a certain condition. Pharmacy wants to focus on, if you had poison ivy, for example, they would give you a steroid to get rid of the poison ivy. But if you also had ulcers, well, the steroid isn't going to help you there. But with a nutraceutical, you may actually be able to conquer both. There are some online stores that sell them. If you wanted to purchase them yourself, I just use caution, do your diligence. You want to make sure it's a reputable source. There's a lot of, as they used to say, snake oil out there. So the cheapest is probably isn't the best, and this is one of those. But chaga is a superfood. So as we were saying earlier, what about the side effects? There really aren't any. There's really none reported. It's possible, just like any food, you could be allergic. So I caution you, approach this safely with a very small dose and make sure that you don't, I wouldn't drink the whole gallon of it. I actually have a typical mason jar I could show you. So this is typically how, when we extract it, we put them into mason jars. I wouldn't drink this whole thing if you don't know. In fact, I probably wouldn't ever drink the whole thing at once. But you would take just a small sample of this and try it and see how you respond to it. But chaga's been around for a long time. A lot of people have used it, and other than potentially a possible allergy, it has no side effects. The triple water extract, which I just showed you, can be consumed as a liquid as it was, or you can take that same liquid and freeze dry it, which we've done at times. I use the rotary evaporator not only for the alcohol, but for the water as well. So water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, most of you know. But in a rotary evaporator at high vacuum, it boils at about 73 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm able to remove the water safely in that manner as well. Now, we also did the alcohol with rotary evaporation, and then I combined them in rotary evaporated just to see what the effects were from each extract. I was hoping to get some kind of a reading on that. But from May of 2017 to May of 2018, Karen and I have done 32 different extractions. But there are many, many, many different types and ways. You'll see online high pressure, CO2, acetone. Some of them are fairly poisonous. What I found, if you're going to look at the composition that they're getting with these elaborate sometimes extractions and what we're getting with just the water, they're about the same. Now, they may get little higher amounts of one versus another, but we're also getting the same thing, identically the same chemistry. So you don't have to really worry about, well, what if I would have had something that was extracted with acetone? Would that have worked? You're getting the same thing that the acetone extract is getting. You're just maybe getting something a little higher. So before I go into the chemical analysis, I'd like to say that if there's anybody who has a son or daughter, niece, nephew, mother, father, uncle, aunt, anybody who's in the lab business or chemical analysis business, we really need to get a partner on this. These tests are fairly expensive, and there are so many things we could try. For example, the first test I was going to run here, I sent to a lab in Ireland. I had bought chaga from Siberia, Russia, from Canada, from Connecticut, and from Pennsylvania. And I performed the extracts and then sent it off to be evaluated. In other words, which tree produces the most of what? So that as we take and adapt this medicine to the patient, we would know, oh, well, this one would be better suited for a yellow birch versus a white birch, or black versus a silver birch. Unfortunately, my samples were so viscous, they had to dilute it to get it to go through their equipment. By the time they got it diluted enough, all they were reading is what they diluted it with. So we got no data. The second lab I went to was in Canada for just a basic analysis, and he came back with, you have over 20 molecules that are unknown to science. So I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. It wasn't really that helpful. As an engineer, I want to know, what am I dealing with? So the next lab was in California. And again, it was a basic test. And what I ended up with here was, at least I know what to ask for going forward, because they gave me total phenols, total polysaccharides. I said, great, which ones? We don't know. But I'll tell you how much of the polyphenols are in there. Yeah, but if I don't know which ones are in there, what good is the total? I mean, so okay, I know I'm pulling a total amount or some number, but what does that number mean? But it did tell me that I have to find a lab who can actually tell me what the molecules are. So I went and found the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center out of St. Louis, Missouri. The test names are unimportant other than place markers for us. RPLC and HILIC are the two mass spectrometer tests that they ran. So when I was getting very little data before, all of a sudden I was hit with this staggering amount of, there are 3,500 molecules that were detected with the RPLC and over 5,000 with the HILIC. So I went from very little data to this giant mountain of data. Well, this is typically what it would look like. And I know this is an eye exercise, and I'll apologize ahead of time, but it's important, or it wouldn't be here. On the left, what you have is the molecule name. And they're really long, so if I actually would have extended it, the rest of the information would have been off the page. So I crunched it down for that reason. But basically, I'm doing what's called unique molecular analysis. So in this case, I want to look at the 4 different extraction techniques. We have freeze-dry, rotary evaporated water, rotary evaporated alcohol, and then I combine those two and then evaporate it to see if what was the water or the alcohol contributing more. Now the purpose of this, as I said, is where pharmacy says, here's a pill, try it and see if it helps your condition. Oh, it didn't work, here's another one. That didn't work, here's another one. What we're interested in doing is developing a medicine that adapts to you. So we take, or your children, obviously your loved ones, we take the total symptoms that they have and try to find not only the best mushroom, but the best extraction technique. The thing that would better suit the patient. We're going to design our medicine to the patient, rather than having the patient try to adapt to the medicine. Interesting things, there were 870 unique chemistries. That took my 5,000 down to a reasonable number. And so it's probably hard to see, but basically the freeze-dried, or what's the water extract, the only difference is it was freeze-dried, and the alcohol produced about the same results, certainly slightly different chemistries, but the freeze-dry actually had 336 molecules unique to its own. So regular water extract, freeze-dried, actually produced its own chemicals that weren't found or missing values, as you can see. Anywhere you see a yellow bar was where freeze-dry actually was the only one to produce a molecule. Okay? Anything that's in orange, 388 of them, were from the alcohol. So once again, rotary evaporated water, freeze-dried water, or the combination didn't give us a molecule. Those two I can accept, okay? The rotary evaporated water only produced 60, and it's also the lowest performer. Does that mean we just want to throw it out? Depends what those 60 are. Maybe one of those 60 is for blindness, or seizures, epilepsy or something. Well, then we would want to do rotary evaporated water for epilepsy, for example. So I still need to go in and research these. And again, this number is tough to tell. This is the one that blew me away, and it still keeps me up at night. I combine 2 and 3, I should get some combination of 2 and 3. But effectively what I've done is I've taken salt, I've put it in water, I stirred it up and got a chocolate cake. Or I've got 86 unique molecules when they didn't show up in 2 or 3, like they came out of nowhere. So these need to be researched heavily, but for some reason, combining these and then doing the evaporation technique produces unique molecules. And as you know, as Dr. Corbett said, as engineers, we hate puzzles, but we love the challenge. So hopefully, if I come back next year, I'll have an answer for you as to why it's doing that. Now, here's the unfortunate, which is why I'm pleading, or if somebody has a rich uncle that passed away and left them a mass spectrometer, please give me a call. That's for anybody. Donald Danforth Center can tell me what, but they can't tell me how much. So, once again, I don't know which of the extraction techniques produced better results. I don't know which tree would produce better results for certain molecules. I do know what the molecules are, but I don't know how much is there. And so, basically I, said, okay, well that's okay for this overall 10,000 foot analysis, but it's kind of horrible from a data standpoint. So I complained to Dr. Evans. And so what he did was he reduced the total number by the highest signal. But as I found that the highest signal, these heavy lifters as he called them, gave me 60 RPLC and 76 Hylet molecules. And again, I haven't had a chance to really dig into it any deeper, but it looks like it skews the data. So we have the whole, and it's showing me one thing, and these things are showing me something else. So I'll still use it, but I'm not putting as much effort or emphasis on that. What I was trying to do is I could spend sometimes days, certainly hours, investigating each one of those molecules you saw, those 5,000 and 3,500. Then there's also isotopes and metabolites off of those that also have to be researched. So as you can see, it would probably take me 200 years to do it by myself, but I'm up for the challenge. Anyway, if anybody has access to a lab or somebody we could partner with that could help us, we have 100 different experiments we'd like to run. I would greatly appreciate it. So this gets us to our first break. This is about the halfway point. So hopefully I answered the question, why mushrooms and how do we get here? Hopefully everybody understands why we're even looking at mushrooms. Long-term use and side effects, again, there aren't any. So the next things we're going to cover basically is why can it help us today, and the 4 mushrooms specifically. If you'd like to take a 5 minute, sure. If anybody would like to, or if you have any questions on the previous 28 slides, feel free.